Okay, so we're going to learn chapter 11 of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, which is the second book of the Tanya. It is, as we've been having in the last maybe 4 or 5 chapters, 7, 8, 9, 10, and now 11, has been a pretty deep discussion about the unity of God, not sufficing with just the simpler meaning of unity, that God is one and not two. Hashem Echad means a lot more. God is one means that the world is one with God. It goes that God needs to constant creation or perpetuating the creation is was a standard idea in the earlier chapters, but now we're saying not only is this world one with God, we're talking about the more spiritual levels. God's midot is one with God, and in this chapter specifically, we're going to be honing in, we're going to be zeroing in on the speech of God, where you may think that that's also a separate entity or a separate, something outside of God, and we're going to be making that case over here in chapter 11. So we'll start with a famous, an anecdote that many of you have, either been rebuked with or taught with in school about a person who falsely spreads a rumor about his friend. He lies and says he tarnishes his friend's reputation. Things spiral out of control. People look at the friend with such disgust and disdain. And now the person who spread these false rumors feels really bad and he wants to correct his wrong. So he goes to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, okay, if you want to correct it, you have to come with me and bring a feathered pillow. Feathered pillow, why? And then he brings a feathered pillow. He says, bring me a knife. And cut open the pillow and spread all the feathers, open the window and spread them all outside on the street. And he's doing it. And then the rabbi says, now you have to pick it all up. And obviously, that's a very hard thing to do. He's looking at all the feathers all over. So the rabbi says, that's exactly what happened with your words, with your speech against your friend. Try to correct it. It's already all out there. How do you take it all back in? It's something that's already outside of you now. Right, I'm sure everyone heard that anecdote. It's a very famous one. Where's it from? Or
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've ever. I think you've talked about it before.
okay, but you've heard it, I'm sure, in school or
Something like that.
okay, yeah. In the way we do it actually in Hebrew school, Adina takes a bottle of toothpaste and has the kids, take all the toothpaste out of the tube, and the kids are having a fun time. And now the next activity is to try to bring it all back in, try to fit it back into the tube. And that's how exactly. So that's how we teach the kids about lashon hara, about not spreading false words or speaking about others. So usually that's used in motivational context, in ways of how to the impact of our words, of how careful we have to be. But today we're using it just as a metaphor to segue into chapter 11, which is all about speech. It's all about speaking, and it's all about the power of our speech, the impact of our speech. Speech has been very popular in Tanya, so you've heard us speak about it before. We've analyzed it from many angles. In fact, the ability to speak is actually what makes us human. So we have the power to think, we have the power to feel, but the way the Torah, when it describes the creation of humanity, I just want to give you an insight. It says that when God breathed into us a breath of life, and Unkelis, has anyone here heard of Unkelis?
Yeah, he translated.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I should say, besides for Shira, thank God the wisdom of Shira at the table is awesome. No, that's good. Very good. So let's see. Robin, have you ever heard of Unclus? Does that name? Oh, good. Okay, cool. And Naomi, I'm assuming you've heard of Unclus? Okay, good. Okay, so we're more than 50% here. So Unclus was a nephew of the Roman emperor who ended up leaving the Rome, escaping to Jerusalem, and converting to Judaism. And he wrote the most important translation of the Torah. He actually wrote the first translation of the Torah into Aramaic, which was the language of the Jews at the time, but it's considered to be a very holy text. In fact, there's a concept of reviewing the translation of Onkelos every Shabbat. So you read the Torah portion on Shabbat in Hebrew, and then you read it in Aramaic. which is quite fascinating because it's considered to be holy because it came from Onkelos. So Onkelos was a convert, and he wrote this translation. So there's small insights into how he translated the words of the Torah that is very, very powerful. Rashi, the great commentary on the Torah, actually quotes Onkelos quite often. If he's not sure of a word, he'll say, "This is how Onkelos is translating it." So when the Torah in Genesis says that God created humanity and he breathed into us a nostril, a breath of life, the way Onkelos translates it is a ruach memalala, a spirit of speech. When God created humanity, he created a life of a speaker. He created a speaking person. That's how Onkelos translates a human being as a person that speaks, a ruach memalala, a life of speech. That's how he translates um, a talking being, is how he translates a human being. So obviously the idea of speech within humanity is very powerful. And Chassidus goes through the concept of speech, and it says that speech is the only thing that actually leaves the realm of your control. So when you're thinking, you're still in control of your thoughts. When you're feeling, you're still in control of your feelings. Once you speak, it's leaving your control. So almost like that anecdote I gave you earlier of the person tarnishing another's reputation with false rumors is out of his control to bring it back anymore. Once he leaves him, it's out of his control. He can't control it anymore. So a feeling remains in you. And even a thought, no matter how real it seems, and your imagination is so good, it's still within you. Words leave you. And that's why the words are able to have an effect, because it's leaving your realm, it's leaving your control. There's a story of quite a very famous story of the Baal Shem Tov. And just around this week, as I mentioned earlier, it's the 19th of Kislev. It's definitely a good time to talk about the Alter Rebbe, whose celebration and liberation we celebrate the Shabbat. And he was continuing the teachings of his teacher, the Maggid, and his teacher's teacher, who was the Baal Shem Tov. And so much of the theme of Tanya, especially Shar Yichud V'Emunah, the gateway of unity and faith in God, is from based on the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So one of the famous stories of the Baal Shem Tov is when he was in a synagogue and praying, and he heard a congregant, a person in the synagogue, yelling at another person or threatening the other person, saying that I'm so mad at you, I'm going to tear you up like a fish. That was their way of threatening each other back then. And the Baal Shem Tov heard that, and he called his disciples, his students, to gather around. And when he wanted to show them something that was going on in the deeper worlds, he would have them go shoulder to shoulder. They would hold their arms together, lock their arms together, and the Baal Shem Tov would put his arms to those closest to him, and they would all be in a circle, and they were able to see in a higher world the soul of that person who threatened, tearing up the soul of the other person like a fish. That's what it was actually happening, even though it was just words. But the effect of those words were extreme in a higher world. That person, their soul, was actually tearing up the soul of the other person. And obviously, the lesson was just how sensitive we have to be, because our words are able to have an impact. It's able to affect another. So that speech itself, the idea that the speech leaves the realm of our control, it leaves who we are, it goes out of our control, and therefore it can have its effect. But going a little bit deeper, based on Chassidus, um, speech as it relates to the human being is also very powerful. Speech, besides for the words leaving you and leaving your control, the Chassidus also explains that speech within you is the first element within the human being that you kind of leave yourself to be able to relate to another. So even if it's still within you, the speech didn't come out yet, just preparing for your speech, preparing your words. Thank you. is already kind of allowing yourself to engage with another. You have to kind of leave your space to encapsulate your thoughts for another. So obviously, thought is just within you. You don't have to relate to another. You're not leaving your space. But when you want to put it this way, if you want to have a relationship requires another, you have to use speech. So not only is the impact of speech affects others, within you, you also have to use speech to leave yourself and to put yourself in the space of another. That starts with speech. Speech is leaving your own space and allowing yourself to be able to engage with another. If you have feelings, you want to communicate them, that requires speech. So speech is a kind of making you leave your own realm of your thoughts, your feelings, and communicating it with another requires speech. It's already putting yourself into the realm of another. Obviously, there's a downside to speech that it could be misconstrued. A thought, you know what you're thinking. But speech, it could be either your tone of voice or the mood that the other person is feeling when you said it. That could be misconstrued and be offensive. Even though you meant it in the best way, they could be having a bad day. And you said the exact words that they didn't want to hear, even though you meant it with a full, loving heart, but it came out the wrong way in their mind because of what they previous experience that they had, and therefore the speech you said could be misconstrued and be taken the wrong way. So we have obviously speech is relating to another; it's outside of ourself, putting yourself into the space of another, and therefore it becomes vulnerable to being interpreted by another. Another story of the Baal Shem Tov, just quickly, the Baal Shem Tov would travel a lot. A lot of times they didn't even know where they were going. They would just allow the carriage, the horses, to pull the wagon in whichever way it was going. And when they would stop, they would know that there's a work to be done over here. So they were at an inn and they were going to spend the night there. And the students of the Baal Shem Tov, and these were giants of students, right? We're not talking about 14-year-old kids. We're talking about esteemed rabbis. The successor of the Baal Shem Tov, who was known as the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the teacher of the Alter Rebbe, he was one of these students. And until the day the Baal Shem Tov died, he was a student, a follower of the Baal Shem Tov. He was from the Holy Assembly of the Baal Shem Tov. So they would travel with their teacher. They would travel with the Baal Shem Tov. And at a certain inn, they were going to spend the night. And when it came time for dinner, the innkeeper was going to feed them the dinner. But they were nervous. We don't know, the kosher status of the inn. We don't know the level of fear of God that you have. And therefore, they were interrogating the innkeeper about who slaughtered the animal, who they want to make sure the animal was a proper animal and not a treif animal. How sharp was the knife when they slaughtered it? Who salted the meat? Who prepared it? Who cooked it? They were asking all these questions. And after 20 minutes of interrogation, there was an old Jew in the back who was, already enjoying his meal, and he was fed up with it. And he says, Jews, Yidden, are you so careful with what leaves your mouth, with how careful you are with what comes into your mouth? Meaning you're interrogating this guy so much about what comes in, and that's fine. But as long as you match it up with what leaves your mouth, are you careful with the words that leave your mouth with the words that come into your mouth? Okay, so just to summarize, we're segueing into chapter 11. Chapter 11 will be talking about the unity of God within God's speech. And we have to understand what speech of God means even. But before we get to that, what we know is about us, from Onkelos, like I translated before from the Torah, he translates the words of the Torah that says a human being as a speaking being, as a person who speaks. That's what the definition of a person is. We have the power to speak. The power to speak is to communicate, to build relationships. In order to do that, it requires leaving oneself. So there's two parts of speech that I just want to summarize. Number one is when you speak, it's out of your control. You can't take it back, like the toothpaste back in the tube or like the feathers back in the pillow, like I said before. It's out of your control. It's much harder to do tshuva on something that you said than on something that maybe you thought or on something that you did, because you could ask for forgiveness and repair it. But when you speak things, it's much harder to get forgiveness because it's all over. How do you take back what you said? So number one, it's out of your control, and number two, it's engaging with someone outside of you. As long as it's within thought and within a feeling, it's within yourself. It's up for the way you feel it. When you're wanting to communicate to another, you have to leave your space and go into the other person's space and go into the other person's space and communicate with their on their lingo and their ability, and therefore it could also be misconstrued. Okay, so we'll stop there for a second. Yes, Lynn.
Yes, so thank you. And I work on this all the time. I teach online. It's much easier to teach in person when students can see my face
Yeah.
and I can get immediate reaction. What I learn is I have I think, clear instructions. I also do a video of my instructions. I have lists, I have checklists, and still students can misconstrue. So there's one thing that my husband has helped me with, because this is a different form of communication. It's still leaving my fingers, but it's my mouth. And he says, write as if not for people to understand, but to make sure people don't misunderstand. And that's different. You have to read it through their eyes and say, how could a person potentially misunderstand or miscue? And then I go back and rewrite my instructions, because now I'm not just thinking from my mouth, but like you said, I'm trying to run it through how they might perceive it. But it's difficult these days because we're used to a text and we miss the nuance of what somebody's trying to say. So it's just, I am much more careful with my speech these days, and I'm very quick to apologize if somebody is misunderstood. I said, I am so sorry. I didn't write this well enough for you to understand. I think I'm being so clear, right. But I will take the onus on myself.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's incredible. And throughout Tanya and Hasidus in general, there's some talks, discourses of the Rebbe's that go on for 20 pages about speech, about the power of speech or the dangers of speech. Um, and from previous classes, we know that speech in the 10 Sefirot would be the 10 divine energies or lights of God. It would be a speech would be Malchus. If you remember a few weeks ago, I was telling you it's the different body parts, and Malchus is the communication, how it speaks. Malchus is in the pen. Malchus is in the mouth. So yeah, that all important things. And Lynn, just going back to what you said about how you communicate it and make sure it's not going to be misunderstood. One of the downsides of speech, and no matter how many times you go it over, and this is going to be one of the main points of the class, is that your essence never goes into speech, because you're really trying to bring it out to on their level. So it's and after explaining this from different angles, it's leaving yourself, it's out of your control. How much of yourself is going into the speech is actually very little.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different angles to this, because I'm not an expert on this, but there's experts on body language to know the mood of the person, or if they're saying the truth based on the body language of that person. I think there's probably experts on the speech based on the way they're speaking, on their eye contact, and maybe even the tone of voice that they're using. I'm sure there's experts for these things. I don't know what they're called, but at the same time, when you speak, it's not the you speaking. It's just the part outside of you that's speaking. You're downgrading your thoughts to be able to communicate with another. And
There's one,
yeah, go ahead.
There's one more point though, the positive side. Sometimes these students have never been encouraged to see all that they could be. And then in the classes I teach, I work very hard to bring out their full potential, and in a challenging way, but also in a enlightening way. And if I get to talk to them or write to them, it's like the first time somebody's ever, in a way, I think I'm giving them a blessing as if they were my children at Shabbat. And they've never received that. So when they do, it's like the response is like this. And it's almost like, could you tell me more? And someone will say, could you say that again? Or I've never heard that. So speech is very
Yeah.
powerful, that we can also transfer blessings from God to individuals that maybe they've never had before. It's a very powerful
Yeah.
tool, which
Yeah.
can be misused.
Yeah. Go ahead, Robin. Yeah, sure.
Wow, I was just caught by what you just said. You're downgrading your thoughts so you can communicate.
Hmm.
That is very interesting because, you know, when we're thinking, we're not necessarily thinking in full sentences quietly, we're just, this electricity is just crackling through our brain. And to communicate to another person, we can't just, zip it over to them. We have to slowly, I mean, it seems fast to us, but we're extricating the essential words or things that we actually have words for, you know, and using them to communicate that thought. So it is downgrading, or that is really, I think that's really something. And by the
Awesome.
way, I have a bachelor's degree in speech communication
Oh,
rhetoric.
hey,
So yes,
awesome.
I've taken entire, semester long classes on nonverbal communication and
Hey,
all that stuff.
awesome. So actually, we're going to get into the nonverbal part in a moment, and that's amazing. So, and part of that downgrade, it actually leads to an upgrade as well, because when the thoughts are all in your mind and it's going so fast, a lot of things could be missed within yourself. When you have to downgrade it and distill it in order to be communicated in a clear way for someone else, all of a sudden things could be much more clearer for you. So we all know that when a person is going through a feeling of fear or anxiety, if you speak it over with someone else, it could calm you down and it could actually bring you clarity. A lot of times you get an answer to something without even needing to ask a question to the other person. You get an answer just by speaking it out. You already get clarity. That's why friendship is so important, or mentorship is so important. So there's a downgrade with speech. It could also lead to an upgrade, but over here we're more focusing on the downgrade part. That it's not you. It's you have to distill it and kind of package it nicely and give it over as speech. The real you comes out beyond speech. It comes out in silence. And I want to clarify that a little bit. Even just part of the most important part of communicating is not just the words you say, but the eye contact that you can make with the other person. And Lynn, like talking about your students, a lot of them are lacking that, lacking that ability to relate to another, to look at another. Um, and I just want to give you a few sample examples from throughout Torah where silence is actually a deeper part of you than words. So one of the most famous ones, and all of us here would be familiar with it, is on Rosh Hashanah, the greatest speech is not what the cantor or the rabbi shares, it's what the shofar sounds. The blast of the shofar is the mitzvah of the day. Beyond any blessing or prayer, it's the nonverbal sound. So it's that shofar blast that reaches the essence of who we are beyond any words that could be recited or sung. Throughout the Talmud, this is fascinating. It's not that often, but a lot of times, obviously, there's debates between colleagues and rabbis, and they're trying to get to the bottom line of a law. And there's one opinion, and then it's refuted. So usually, the original opinion will answer back. We're trying to get to the bottom of it, and they're defending their position. Sometimes they don't even defend their position; they just remain silent. Usually, if they don't have a comeback, if they don't have an answer, the law won't follow their opinion because it was refuted without a defense, without an answer. But sometimes you'll see that even if they remain silent, the law would follow their opinion, even though it was refuted. Yet the Talmud just concludes that they were silent, and the law follows them. How is it if they were silent? you would think the bottom line shouldn't follow them. They didn't have an answer. And what's explained in Hasidus is sometimes their silence shows us that their opinion came from a deeper part of themselves than any words that they could have shared. And therefore, we follow their opinion because of the silence that accompanied their opinion. So, I'm not an expert in Talmud to understand how their silence brought out, and I'm not an expert of speech or nonverbal communication either. But just from Kabbalah, what I could tell you is the silence is coming from a deeper part. The nonverbal part of us is coming from a deeper part than where our speech is coming from. So the speech is needing to leave our space and go into the space of another. It kind of leaves our control, right? Once you speak, it's out there in the world and you can't take it back. And yeah, hold on one second. And just one other example is a niggin, a melody. Oh, is that what you're going to say Sharon? So a melody, there's two types of melodies. One is with words and one is without words. Right? The ayayay nigun melodies that don't have words, those are considered to be the quill of the soul, even beyond a melody with words. It's beyond words. Or if you take, let's say, tears is a place, it could be of joy or of sadness, but it's a place where it's indescribable by words, and therefore the only thing left is the tears or the silence. And I'm trying to give you different examples that are relatable, that the silence within a person is really a symbol of the etzem, which is the Hebrew word for the essence of the person. When a person speaks, their etzem is not being communicated in their speech. It's only a lower part of themselves that they are allowing to be to the outside. It's just a semblance of yourself. But the etzem doesn't get communicated when you speak. Whereas in the silence of a person, that is sometimes a place where the etzem is being communicated even louder than words. Yes, Shira.
I was just thinking about the Shema, the hero Israel. Listen. Yeah.
I got it. The listening beyond the speaking. Yeah. Exactly. Very well said. Okay, awesome. And I'm just going to, I think before Naomi put something in the chat and Lynn also did. So let's just put that together. So from the marriage communication expert, Naomi, she says, nonverbal communication gives a stronger message than in actual words. The tone of voice, the body language, facial expression. Awesome. And Lynn says, when we support people in grief, sometimes just sitting with a person is a powerful form of communication. And Lynn, I agree with that so much. And, Shira over here is agreeing as well. And I'm pretty sure Vivian agrees with it also. Last year we gave a 6-week JLI course called Journey of the Soul. And it's one of the most popular courses. If you haven't taken it yet, you could ask me for the recording, or you take it if another rabbi is giving it soon. It's very powerful. And one of the things it talks about is Shiva etiquette. And it talks about just sitting there and not needing the right thing, the right words to comfort. Sometimes just sitting there is more powerful than anything that you can share. And it's a powerful form of communication. Thank you, Lynn, for sharing that. Okay, so now it will lead us to a beautiful idea about speech. When the Torah describes God creating the world, it talks about God speaking and it coming to be. In the words of King David, Hu Amar Vayehi, he spoke and it came to be. It's known as the 10 utterances. God said, let there be light, let there be the sky, let there be animals and vegetation. So why describe it as a speech? Why the metaphor of speech? God doesn't literally speak. So it could have said God thought and it came to be. God felt and it came to be. Why speech? And it seems so, there's a lot to unpack over here, but I just want to try to remain loyal to the text of chapter 11. So the speech, when God created the world, it brings across a type of relationship that God has with the world, a relationship built on speech. It seems that when God created the world, God removed himself. It's only a little part of God, so to speak. Whereas when God created souls and God created angels, he didn't speak it. And therefore, maybe it's a deeper connection with the souls than God has with the worlds. God is more removed from creation of the worlds because God uses speech. And, till now we've been explaining that the speech is, a lower part. It's more downgraded. And if you think of it, there's even in our speech, there's two parts, there's two ways of how we speak. Sometimes an employer is talking to his employees, or a parent is talking to their child, or a spouse is talking to their spouse, or friends are talking, but the speech is really with an expectation of actionable results. I'm speaking to get a result, to get an action done. Sometimes we speak without the need of an action. It's just speaking for the sake of speaking, but sometimes we speak for the sake of an actionable result. And that's obviously on a lower level because it's taking us to the next level of action. When God speaks, so to speak, no pun intended, that's always with an actionable result. Whenever God speaks, it creates something. God said, let there be light, and it created light. God said, let there be whatever it is, and it came to be. So when God speaks, it's always with an actionable result. We, on the other hand, sometimes speak with an intent of action, and sometimes we don't.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, just let me finish this little note over here. But by God's speech, it seems, is more removed from himself when he created the world because it was with a tangible result, with creating a world, with creating, all the bits and pieces of the world. So let me just finish one more thing and then we'll take questions. Hashem, God, is engaging with the world through his speech, what seems to be outside of himself, just like by us. What we're saying is we speak to something outside of us. Within ourselves, we don't need speech. We think, we feel, but to relate to another, it requires that speech. So in the Torah, it uses the term speech as a way that we can relate to God. But it seems like it's not God's etzem, God's essence in creation. It's not one with God to the same degree if God is speaking. So that's where the Tanya is going to get into that we can't fathom understanding the way we speak. It's something outside of us. But by God, in the term speaking used in the creation, it's still echad, it's still one with God. God's unity encompasses not only the creation of the world, not only God's character and midot, even God's speech remains one with God, having spoken. So that's what we're going to try to get into in a moment in the lingo of Tanya, and then I would love if we have a few extra minutes to read it inside the text. But that's what the chapter is coming to discuss. The speech of God, don't think is something outside of God. The way we relate to speech, it's still absolutely one with God. That's what we're going to try to get into. But let's just take questions. Yes, Shira.
So when we daven, are we not? We're supposed to speak, right?
Of course, yeah,
Malaka,
yeah,
actually, you said speak.
yeah.
So we're actually communicating through speech too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we're in Hashem's image.
Oh, and communicating through speech. Yeah, very
Yeah.
good. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so let's do it in Tanya lingo now and see if this makes sense. When Hashem wants to express his midot, his character, how does he express it? It's expressed through speech. So Tanya over here is going to take it a step further, that Hashem's feelings, even not only his feelings are expressed, but even when by God, by his thoughts, so to speak, that produces results too. Let me just explain to you the contrast. This is Tanya elaborates on this a little bit. I don't know how much I understand it or how much we'll get into it, but I just want to explain the way I understand it. By us, if we want to see a result, we have to speak something out or do something. When we think, it's not going to bring any results. Thinking alone won't change anything. Whereas by God, God's speech has results, and also God's thoughts have results. By us, speech has a result, like the example the I gave at the beginning of the rumor, the person who tarnishes his friend's image and reputation just by rumor, by his speech. But by God, even Hashem thinking, it already brings about results. So now I just want to try to put it together in the words of Tanya. The past few weeks we have been saying that Hashem is achdut pshuta, which means simple, non-composite, oneness, plain and absolute unity, total unity. Hashem echad. Everything that seems to be outside of God's reality is really one with God. Nothing is outside of God's reality. But you would think that speech of God is outside of God's reality because it's not included in the oneness. It requires an outside to speak. That's how we relate to speech. We would think that the buck stops here. So the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 11 of Shar Yichud, the Emunah, in the Tanya chapter that we're learning today, that that's not true. What does so when God creates using a speech, he creates world, he creates human beings with the power to rationalize and speak. The way God speaks is in a higher way than we could understand, because God is the creator, so he made us in his image, but the way God is higher than that. So with words, God brought existence into play, and God brought souls into existence, but God's speech has to be beyond it. So when the Torah says God speaks, it's not the way we understand or relate to speech as something outside of us. We have to conclude that the speech, the way we understand it, that it's separate, it's only from our perspective. But by God, from God's perspective, even his speech is just as part of his midot, part of his character, part of God's identity, as is his wisdom. Speech is not outside of God, just like we could relate to our wisdom as within us. That's how with by God, his speech is still totally within him, even having spoken. So I'm struggling to explain it because we can't relate to it. By us, speech is something outside of us. It's something we have to prepare to communicate with another. It's meant for another, but yet by God, even the speech is as one in his godliness as we would relate to our thoughts. Thoughts are one with us. It's still within us. It's still contained within us. No one knows what we're thinking unless we express it. But by God, even having spoken, it's still totally one within God. So just in other words, by us, if we want to enter into the space of another and leave ourselves, we need to speak, and that leaves ourselves and allows us into the framework of another. But by God, to affect the outside, he doesn't have to leave his own space. He doesn't have to leave himself. So God chose specific conduits with how to communicate with the world, and yet it remains within God. God's speech remains within him, even while communicating it with world. And the way that Tanya explains it is the conduits are the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And it's not just the letters as communication, but the Tanya says over here, even the shapes of the letters of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, all that is part of the conduit that God uses to communicate with creation, and yet it remains one within God. I'm just going to finish my notes over here, and then if we have time, we'll try to read it inside. The point is that the more God's unity pervades, the more God's unity strengthens our existence. And this is just going back on what we talked about briefly in chapter 10. Usually you would think the more someone else is in our space, the less of us there is. The more someone else is in control, the less we are in control. The more someone else has authority, the less authority we have. If someone else is strengthened, that would make us weakened. But over here, what we're saying is with God's unity, the more godliness is in world, the more united we are with God, and therefore the more our existence is strengthened. When we extend the circle of God's unity, which we've been doing in Tanya, and explaining that God's unity is everywhere and there's nothing out of God, the more we extend the circle of truth. So the more God's unity is extended, that circle is extended, the more truth is extended, and the more value our existence gets. Not it gets stronger, it doesn't get weaker. So it's just a powerful idea that chapter 11 is trying to bring it out. I do suggest to try to read it inside. I found it a little hard to get the full idea, but of what I do understand, even God's speech is fully united with God, unlike our speech. Our speech, we have to leave ourselves, whereas by God, his speech, so to speak, is fully one with God. And what we're trying to plan, or the map of what the Alter Rebbe is trying to do in these chapters, is that explaining the more the circle of God is extended, the more it strengthens our existence. It doesn't weaken it. The more unity of God pervades, the more of our existence is strengthened. In other words, last week we were learning it in the context of truth and falsehood. Truth, it doesn't need any believers of truth for it to be true. Truth is true. Falsehood, the only way it could stand is if there's people buying into it, people talking about it. It gives fuel to the sheker, to the falsehood. As soon as it gets exposed, it's forgotten. It doesn't exist anymore. So the truth of God's existence, the broader it is, the more it strengthens everyone around, the more it strengthens us. Just to conclude with a story, and then we'll try to see if we could get it inside. It's just a story. While I was researching for this chapter, it seemed like a beautiful story to share. Not so related to this concept, but just related to speech in general. There was a chassid who was traveling back from his rebbe, and as they would do it on the way back from visiting the rebbe, they would travel to the different shtetelach along the way back to their home, and they would share inspiration that they saw or that they felt or that they listened to the Torah teachings, and they would share the ideas that they heard by the court of the Rebbe, by the synagogue. And he was inspiring others in different communities, and he came to one community where he was so impressed with their scholarship. They had a big dinner with a lot of the influential scholars of the town, and they were all sharing beautiful ideas. He was sharing what he heard from his Rebbe, they were sharing what they heard from their Rebbes, and the scholarship, the academic level of Torah wisdom was off the charts. It was incredible. And he spent the night there, and the next morning he came to the synagogue for services, for prayer, and he was shocked. What he saw is they were just mumbling the words as if it didn't matter. And he couldn't take it because he was so careful in his prayers. And that went hand in hand with his study. The inspiration and study, it was balanced, and it was almost complemented with his prayers. But over here, it seems like they were just into their study and into their wisdom. But when it came to actual prayer, they were walking around. They didn't have phones back then, but they would have been checking their phones and mumbling the words. And he was disappointed in them. So after services, he went over to one of the people and he started mumbling words to him. He's like, blah, 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 blah. And the guy's like, what did you say? And he repeats it, gibberish. And the person's like, what are you saying? He's like, I'm asking, what are you doing today? What are you having for breakfast? And he's like, oh, I didn't understand you. He was like, yeah, because that's how you were praying. You were just mumbling words and you couldn't understand me. And how would you want God to understand your language also when you speak like that? Anyway, they got the point, and they took a resolution to be more careful and meticulous on prayer, pronouncing it properly, etc. Anyway, a week later, this chassid made it home, and he had a 2-year-old or 1-year-old that came running to the door and was so excited to see their father, and the baby was in full excitement of seeing their father, who was traveling for a month or so, was trying to express themselves, and it came out as baby language. And the mother understood exactly what the baby was saying, and the father didn't understand it because he wasn't home for the past month, and he didn't get the baby language. So he was so impressed and complimenting his wife that she was able to understand the language of the baby. And without knowing the whole background of his visit to the other shtetl, she started saying, what, I was just thinking about that this morning when I was praying. I was saying that a mother understands the language of their baby, even when no one else understands it. Like they could be talking total baby language, and she was like, "Oh, you want a glass of milk?" No one else could understand anything that the baby's saying, and yet the mother can understand it. So when she was praying, she told her husband that while she was praying, she also felt that God is our parent, our Father in heaven. He understands our language, even if no one else can. And I just read that story. I found it very powerful. Not so much to say that we could just mumble our prayers and get away with it because God understands, but more the idea that even if we don't understand our prayers or we don't understand how to pray well, you just pray from your heart, and in your baby language, God will understand.
You could mispronounce a Hebrew word.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not so related to the topic of today, but just relating to the idea that our speech, it has to be communicated in a proper way with the right tone of voice. Otherwise, it could get misconstrued. But when we speak to God, we're kind of speaking to God on His level of speech. And when it comes to that, we could just put our expectation in God's speech. To quote, if I'm not mistaken, it's from the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria of blessed memory, who says, "Ani mispalel al dat zehatinuk." I'm praying with the mind of that young child, because that the innocence and purity of the young child just praying. Sometimes that's what we have to go back to, the simple faith of a young child. All right, so now let's see if we could get some of this inside, and then just to answer some of the um oh cool, 7% is what the actual words say. Cool. With speech of Hashem like the rays. So that's interesting. I was thinking of that, Lynn. Would speech of Hashem be like the rays of the sun? That's a perfect example. And the beauty is, from our perspective, the rays of the sun seem to be outside of the sun. But from the sun's perspective, the rays are totally, totally there. And that's a perfect example that the Alter Rebbe used in the past. And then absolutely, speech would fall into the example of the rays of the sun, that from God's perspective, speech never left him. It's still fully there. It's still, one with the sun, just like, and that's exactly what speech is. But from our perspective, it would seem like it seems separate, and therefore we have to put ourselves and see it from God's perspective. And then volume 38 by language is 55%. Wow, that's interesting. Okay, awesome. Let's see. I just want to read. It's on page 155 is the beginning of the chapter. The title is God's speech and his attributes. So I suggest reading it inside. It gets a little bit deep, but we're gonna jump straight right to the practical lessons. If you're looking on page 157, it goes like this. If you don't have it inside, that's fine. I'm just gonna read it slowly, and it's some of the ideas that we were just sharing. And it goes like this: the 10 statements or utterances, which were, the way God communicated his speech into creation. So the 10 statements through which God created the world are something of a paradox. They are outward projections of divine energy, but they are still one with God. So the way we look at speech is that something outside, but the way it is by God, it's still fully one with God. So the speech of God, or the 10 utterances, the 10 statements, are somewhat of a paradox where it's still within God, and yet it's God's way of communicating. A Hasidic thought on 158, and this is from the teacher of the Alter Rebbe, who was known as the Maggid of Mezrich, from Ukraine, and his actual name was Rab Dov Ber Friedman. All 22 letters, these are the 22 Hebrew letters, exist in thought, which is the root of all letters. That's why you can't speak anything aloud without thinking of it first. So all of our speech is actually in our thoughts. So how do we think? We think with letters. We think with words. It's just before it comes out in speech, it's thought of. If you do utter a word without any thought, it will lack understanding, wisdom, and intelligence. So thought is the root of all the worlds, which were revealed through speech. So the revelation of it is speech, but the root of it is in the thought. And that's a little bit of a way of how we could relate to God's speech. It's the way it's still within our thoughts. On 159, a practical lesson, a string of divine letters is an individualized package of divine energy, which is tailor-made to dress in a specific creation. Okay, so this was a pretty deep part of the chapter. It's about different combinations. I'm not, it's if maybe I'll just try to read one paragraph on 159. If you just read one paragraph in the middle, for in those things not mentioned explicitly, other divine energies and letter combinations from Chesed were dressed, which were associated with the creation of water or whatever was being created by Chesed. So this is, I guess over here he's talking about dressing and packages. In Hebrew, it's called sirufim, which are combinations. So God created the world with 10 utterances, but even though God didn't say, let there be a rock, that was also created. It was created using the 22 letters, but from different combinations and different channels. Okay, I'm not so familiar with that. We'll just keep on going over here. On 160, I think we only have 2 or 3 more practical lessons to the chapter. So on 160, we read, even God's thought has creative power. It creates hidden worlds. So that's something that's unrelatable, more or less unrelating to us, because by us, it's really our speech that creates, that can have an effect, but our thoughts can't. Yet by God, his thoughts have creative powers. I will say that one of the most famous Hasidic adages is in Yiddish is trach gut vet sein gut. Have you heard of it? Think good and it will be good. Or in Hebrew, it's tachshov tov yetov. Our thoughts can affect reality, and it's a pretty powerful idea, and it's taken maybe from this chapter, where the idea is that by God, his thoughts could have an effect. By us, usually our thoughts can't. It's usually only our speech and obviously our action that has an effect. But yet, if we are in the resemblance of God, then if we have positive thoughts, it could actually change reality. And I'll just we'll take questions, and I see a few more comments. Let me just finish it inside in case anyone has to go. God's speech, this is on 162 now. God's speech conveys and channels his attributes, which are one with his actual self. So at least from his perspective, his speech is totally one with him. So from his perspective, his speech is one. From our perspective, it seems to be something outside. And the final one is on 164. While they are worlds apart, there is one similarity between divine and human language. Both are channels of flow. So both, I guess, are flowing energy. By us, the human language, I guess I don't understand that one so much, but it's basically the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are God's way of flowing God's energy into the world. Yeah, I told you some deep stuff over here. Let me just take the comments and questions. So this discussion begs the question, how do we become, or what do we do to be more filled with the existence and the essence of Hashem? So powerful stuff, Lynn. And really, that's a great way, a great thing to discuss in the class. The goal is that God's unity pervades not only the creation of the world, and not only in God's attributes and kindness in the world, and our feelings should also be one with God, but even our way of speech should be part of God's essence. And it's such a beautiful idea, because so much of this, like I warned at the beginning of learning this book, a lot of this is more academia, more, exploring the existence and the oneness of God. But then the harder part is making it practical and making sure that it's something relatable to us. So our goal is to be more connected with God's etzem, more connected with God's oneness, and realizing that God's speech in the world is part of his etzem, because nothing is outside of the circle of God's oneness. And therefore, perhaps, even when we speak, we should realize we should speak with a certain mindfulness, the way it is reflecting our inner self. It shouldn't be just something said out of outside energy. It should be something more connected with ourselves, and reflecting the truth of who we are rather than just something on the outside. I would love to hear more answers to that, but I know Naomi's waiting for a question also. But Lynn, if you have more thoughts on that, I would love to hear. But Naomi, I know you were waiting for a while. Yeah.
Yes, the phrase "hidden world" was mentioned a little while ago as one of the thoughts to take with us. What does that mean? A hidden world? God's thoughts create hidden worlds.
So it's more like we've learned about the four spiritual worlds, right? The highest of them is Atzilut, and then which is more known as the emanation of God. So those worlds are more hidden, that they're there, but it's more light and less vessels, and therefore it's not as tangible or not as relatable. It's not as revealed to us. And the thoughts of God is where the hidden worlds are more created, and our job is to really try to tap into that energy more, to be more mindful of that. Does that make
And
sense?
God is continually creating these hidden worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And his thoughts are making it happen.
So that's a good question, right? Because we're always talking about it's God's speech that's making it happen. But if we're saying that it's God's thoughts where the hidden worlds are created, I don't know the answer. It's almost like God's thoughts is what's keeping those hidden worlds into existence. I don't know. I would have to pay better attention to the text of the Tanya chapter
I
11.
put a scripture in there about God's thoughts from Isaiah. I did have to look up the reference, but
what chapter is this from? 55?
Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9.
Oh, Kilo machshavotay machshavotechem, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. That's a very powerful one. Nor are your ways my ways, for as the heavens, I know the Hebrew of this very well. Shemaim, Ushmei Shemaim, Lo Yichalkelucha. So the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. It's powerful stuff.
Might
Thank
not
you.
be a good translation. I had to look
No,
it up.
it's
I
good.
remembered it, but I didn't have the words for it.
I know you were in chapter 54 yesterday, so it's nice to get the next chapter today. That's good stuff. Okay, I know we're over time, and there's so much more to talk about in this, and it's quite a hard chapter. I do suggest trying to read it inside and see if you understood something else than what I understood. But God willing, next week we'll learn chapter
Will
12.
we review it again, or do we go on? Will we be reading inside?
I think we're going to go on because it's hard things for me to even understand on this basic level, unless you have more insights that you learn and you wanted to discuss. But it's yeah, pretty heavy duty. Steve, you have any comments on it? No? All right. For those joining us this evening, we'll see you at 7:30 for the JLI Secrets of the Bible. All right, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Yom Tov. Bye.
Bye, Robin. Bye, Lynn. Bye, Naomi. Bye, Steve.
Bye. Thank you.
Whatever.
And bye,